Welcome to Shad's Guitar Show. Whether it's the gear or the players who made the gear famous, join me each episode as we discuss all things guitar. Well, hey, what's up everyone, and welcome into yet another exciting episode of Shad's Guitar Show. Appreciate you guys being here with me for this one. As I always say, it is a lot of fun to do the show. And it's even more fun to know that there's people out there listening and, hey, maybe you're even enjoying this. If you continue to listen, it must mean there's something interesting about the show. So thank you very much for being a part of the journey. I've been watching the analytics of the show and more listeners continue to show up, and they are from more parts of the world. And that's fascinating to me. And a lot of fun, really cool. So anyway, moving forward on this episode, I wanted to do kind of just a short history, if you will, of Jimmy Page's famous 1959 Les Paul. I think a lot of us already know some things about the guitar, and it's not that there's a tremendous amount to know. So this episode isn't going to necessarily be super long, but just wanted to kind of, it's obviously one of the most iconic Les Pauls out there, so I figured it was worth a discussion and just talking about, how he got the guitar, what modifications have been made, and when it shows up in the Led Zeppelin catalog, which is also kind of an interesting story. So anyway, let's dive into a little short history of Jimmy Page's number one. Today we're talking about one of the most famous electric guitars in rock history, Jimmy Page's 1959 Gibson Les Paul Standard, better known as number one. If there is a single guitar that helped define the sound of Led Zeppelin, this has to be it. When Led Zeppelin recorded their debut album in 1968, Page was primarily using his famous 1959 Fender Telecaster, a guitar that was given to him by Jeff Beck. That Telecaster was responsible for most of the sound of Led Zeppelin 1. But in the spring of 1969, everything changed. Joe Walsh, who was playing with the James Gang and would later join the Eagles, owned a beautiful 1959 Gibson Les Paul Standard. Now, Walsh believed Page would love the guitar and encouraged him to buy it. The two struck a deal, and Page purchased the instrument for a reported $500. The moment Page played the guitar, he knew it was special. He later described it as having incredible sustain and an effortless feel that made it ideal for both recording and touring. The Les Paul quickly became his main guitar and eventually earned the nickname Number One. One interesting detail is that the guitar had already been altered before Page bought it. The neck had been shaved down to a thinner profile by a previous owner. But rather than seeing this as a flaw, Page loved the fast, slim feel. The thinner neck became a defining characteristic of the instrument and contributed to its unique playing experience. Over the years, Page continued modifying the guitar. One of the most visible changes was the installation of sealed Grover tuners, and this was a very common modification on Les Pauls of the era. These offered improved tuning stability and became part of the guitar's unmistakable appearance. And of course, when we think about the guitar's appearance in our mind, we visualize this Les Paul. We always think of the black uncovered bridge humbucker and the regular covered neck pickup. But originally the guitar came with two vintage PAF humbuckers. During the early 1970s, the bridge pickup failed and was eventually replaced. Later versions of the guitar feature different replacement pickups, even including a custom Seymour Duncan humbucker. Perhaps the most famous electronic modification was the addition of a push-pull control that allowed the bridge pickup to be coil split. This gave Page access to brighter, more single coil-like tones while retaining the power of a humbucker-equipped Les Paul. These modifications helped Page cover an enormous range of tones in the studio and on stage, from thick, sustaining lead sounds to surprisingly articulate rhythm parts. Now, today, from a collector's standpoint, we cringe at the thought of shaving down a 59 Les Paul neck, or replacing the original tuners with Grovers, or replacing one of those mythical PAF pickups, or adding, the push-pull circuit and changing the wiring. But at the time, these guitars were not the mythical status that they are now. And especially in the hands of Page, he was using this as a tool. We look at it as a legendary, guitar, but in his mind, he needed a guitar that would cover a lot of bases, get him a lot of sounds, because, in the studio, Led Zeppelin was obviously famous for using, a lot of layering and different guitar sounds. So to replicate a lot of that live, Page was making modifications that made the guitar, more dependable and had more tonal options, never thinking about the collectability or the value of the guitar in the long run. As many of these guys, when we think about these legendary guitars, for them it was a tool. For us, it's reached mythical status, but for them, it was just, it was a hammer, for lack of better words. And although many fans associate Jimmy Page with the Les Paul throughout Led Zeppelin's career, the guitar was not used on the band's first album. Led Zeppelin 1 was primarily recorded with the famous Dragon Telecaster. Page acquired the Les Paul in 1969, after the first album had already been completed. The guitar was immediately put to work, though, during the recording sessions for Led Zeppelin 2. As a result, Led Zeppelin 2 is generally considered the first Led Zeppelin album to feature the number 1 Les Paul extensively. And when you hear the massive riff of a song like Whole Lotta Love, you're hearing the beginning of the Les Paul era of Jimmy Page's career. So there are plenty of famous 1959 Les Paul standards out there. Billy Gibbons has one, Eric Clapton had one, Peter Green had one, but Jimmy Page's number 1 might be the most influential of them all. It became the sound of Led Zeppelin's greatest years. It was the guitar behind countless legendary solos, unforgettable riffs, and some of the most iconic live performances in rock history. And even today, when most guitar players picture Jimmy Page, they're not thinking about the Dragon Telecaster or even the double neck. They're thinking about that incredible Sunburst 59 Les Paul Standard, slung low, plugged into a wall of Marshall amplifiers, and creating the soundtrack of an entire generation. And that Les Paul in the hands of Jimmy Page, being played in the band Led Zeppelin, is the reason many people started to play guitar in the first place. And for that matter, continue to do so even all these decades later. If you enjoyed this episode on Jimmy Page's 1959 Les Paul, do me a favor and share it with a friend. Also, wherever you're listening to this episode right now, please leave a 5-star review for the show. Next time you're on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed at Shad's Guitar Show, and also follow Shad's Guitar Show on Instagram. I really appreciate you guys being along for the ride, as I say, and you know what? If you'll continue to listen, I'm going to continue to talk about all things guitar.